Folks, if you're just joining us, we're just getting set up, waiting for folks to enter. Thanks for joining us on the webinar today with our panel event on data-informed product and design. All right, and there we go. I want to be respectful of people's time today. Again, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Welcome, everyone, for joining us for today's LinkedIn Live panel on data-informed product design and in B2B and SaaS. I'm Mark Baldino. I'm a co-founder of Fuzzy Math. We're a UX design consultancy, and we primarily help B2B and enterprise teams design smarter, more human-centered digital products. And we spend a lot of our time aligning design teams with business goals and using data to drive decisions and uncover insights and deliver measured or measurable outcomes. And today we're going to just sort of explore how product and design teams are putting data to work, not just to track progress, but to guide strategy and shape experiences and drive adoption. And we just have like a fantastic group of panelists today. So I'd love for all of you to introduce yourselves, Lizelle, then Holly, and then Greg. If you could just give us, obviously name, role, and company, and then, one or two sentences on how you are using data in your product and design work. So Lizelle, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lizelle Mulcair, and I work for Novo Nordisk in the drug development space of our business. And I work within a digital products group, and I'm heading up a team on product operations and analytics. We are starting this very exciting journey of bringing more information, user behavior information, to our product teams for the clinical systems that we're using to help us run our clinical trials. So it's a very exciting journey. It's a very new journey for many of us. And we are learning a lot along the way. Our focus is around user adoption. And I'll hand over to the next colleague here.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Holly Reynolds, Product Design Manager at Pendo. Super excited to be here. I actually head up the AI and analytics designers. We use data to better understand our customers. I mean, we're a data product, so it is at the foundation of every decision that we make. We use it to better understand our customers, determine the efficacy of our product and design decisions, and we use it to test ideas in a nutshell. And I'll hand it off to Greg.
Hi, my name is Greg Thomas. I am currently job hunting, like so many of you out there. I'm formerly the Director of User Experience at TaxSlayer, and I've been around the block at several other companies that you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open to new connections. We use design in my practices that I've built to tell stories, right? We use data, and design takes that data and we layer it into telling the story so that we can make the story more rich and more in-depth and provocative for the people that are, absorbing that information. So notice I just said data, qualitative, quantitative. There's a mix of the two, but they all play a role. And I could go on and on, but I don't want to throw Mark's agenda off, so I'll stop.
No, that's good, Greg. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to those concepts there. I would love to dig in at some point around the storytelling nature here. I want to start with sort of foundations, and Holly, gonna ask you to start here. What, in your mind, in your practice, I should say, does data-informed product and design mean to you when you're doing digital product design? And if you have an example of a time where data helped change direction or maybe rethink a decision?
Yeah, so data informed to me means proactively using data to help shape our product and design decisions. It also means knowing, though, when to experiment and test ideas, make a call on versus just making a call on next steps. So basically at Pendo, we have an ongoing set of data that we can pull from in our product itself. We use other methods as well, but we are constantly reviewing that data and learning from it over time. And so we rely on that to help us with the direction of our decisions, but not to explicitly give us a solution. We want to leave room for, exploration. And we don't need an answer to every question. Like we've learned, we do not need that level of direction from the data. So we like to have room for both data-driven, but also room for exploration. Maybe a time when product data led the team to change direction was we had been working on a feature for some time. We had a roadmap planned out with a few slices of work. We'll just say maybe slices A, B, and C for the purpose of the discussion. And we had a small alpha test group of customers that we were conducting some usability tests with, showing them some of the designs, collecting feedback on that. From that research, one of our UX researchers that works with us uncovered that slice A, which is what we were going to deliver first, was actually the least valuable piece of work for the customer. So in fact, slice C, which we had planned for much later release, ended up being of the greatest value. This was a brand new feature, so it was really important to us to ensure that we had strong early adoption. Ideally, that was the goal. And because of that, we pivoted. We moved that slice C of work up, shifted our goals to focus on that, and then planned to deliver the other slice at a later time so we could ensure that we accomplished that goal. And it was the right decision.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? How did you define value in that value to the user to say like this slice was more important than the other slice?
So this was actually led by one of our researchers, but there were a series of tests that he was doing at that time. I think that there were ways that he would attempt to ask questions to understand the value. We use a series of scales. We use SUS, we use user satisfaction, UX. So there were a couple of methods that he used to try to gauge which of the features would be most valuable. One, I think, was a ranking method as well. And through just those conversations, the collection of both the quantitative and the qualitative data, he was able to determine which one was more valuable.
Great, thanks. Greg, what's your take on data-informed sort of, product and design?
I loved Holly's answer, so I will omit some of the things I was going to say that were similar. But to me, it's this sort of yin and yang dynamic between qualitative and quantitative data. And that data can come from multiple places. But if either is out of balance, then you end up with decisions being guided, in a biased fashion. And so I think it's important that the design team strives to bring both qualitative and quantitative where they can. And quantitative is always tough in some of the things we do. But it's important that there's balance there. And that's, to me, if you get that right balance, that's when you're starting to really be cooking with gas, so to speak, for your product.
What happens when things get out of balance?
You end up with poorly crafted experiences that meet one goal but not the other. Most often, in my experience, it can be easy to start just meeting the goals of the business and getting things done because you're pressured and you're under timelines, versus actually accomplishing the remedying of pain points for people. You got to do both if you're going to create something compelling.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Greg. Lizelle, ask you the same question around, what does data-informed product and design mean to you and your organization?
Thank you so much. Really great perspectives from both you, Holly and Greg. But for me, what it means in my organization, where I sit in a enterprise environment in a pharmaceutical, it is about user adoption. And we've actually spent some time going back into some of the basics. What do we think adoption means? And for us in our business, it means correct use, effective use, efficient use, and then, a bonus would be satisfied use. Correct use is really, really important when given what we do as a business and the clinical operations of of our business. We have a number of internal users that are using many of our digital products in order to do their work. So by defining what we mean by adoption as a first step, I think is key. And then the second step is, what does it take to be able to say or observe that it is effective and it is efficient and that it is satisfactory? And that's the starting point that we are building. So I call it we're building up a product analytics capability muscle within our digital product organization across our lines of business. And we are starting this evolution of understanding amongst our clinical operations space. So to come back to the question around where you've seen it working well, I think what we are observing more is where it's not working. So when we get a lot of feedback from our internal customer groups, which describe a lot of frictions. We can see inefficiencies. We can see that the time that it takes to complete activities is considerably slower, perhaps, than what it could be. And so we understand that perhaps some of that is to do with the way how we've configured some of these applications. Approximately 80% of our products are vendor-based, and then we do also build our own. And so we understand it from that point of view, observing what is not working so well. And what we're trying to do and bring into our organization, yes, we do need to have some numbers behind us to understand how to think about the right decision making, the right prioritization, the right thinking around configuring new features and things like that. But we need to give our teams that evidence, if you like, to help them make those decisions. So that's where we are at this moment in time. So it's quite a different way of thinking within our organization as well.
Right. And if I can, you're in a heavily regulated industry, clinical data, like people are familiar with data in the world you live in, but are they used to this type of data to drive like design and product decisions? Is that a new thing for them, or kind of struggling to even communicate? Okay, it is. What are some of the challenges in if other folks are listening and they're watching and they're trying to maybe do something similar in terms of introducing data-informed decision-making, but for a product perspective? Like, what are some of the challenges? Maybe what are some of the tricks that you all are using to break through when it's so nascent or new in your organization?
I think that one of the things we really understand is actually data when it comes to regulatory, GDPR and things like that, because that is our business. We are dealing with clinical data, which is obviously us, human data, right? So we really understand that side of things, and we have to. That's our business. What I'm learning is that how we assess the risk for how we understand behavioral information on top of the work that our people are doing is a new muscle that we're beginning to exercise. Like, how do we do this in the right way and in line with not only our own policies and procedures, but also what is expected of us? So we are extremely mindful, and we're also quite open to imagining what it could look like when we get there. So we are mindful of risk, but we're also ambitious in a practical way.
Fantastic. Thank you. Greg, next question's coming to you, so you be ready. For anybody who's watching, I think somebody on my team mentioned, if you have a question, we're going to spend the last 15 minutes or so answering audience questions. So feel free to use the comments. It's kind of weird how LinkedIn does this, but at the bottom, if you're on LinkedIn, there's a comment section. It looks like you're adding a note, but just add a comment if you have a question, and then we'll promote those towards the end. Okay, Greg, you and I have actually talked about this. I said to you once, a lot of my clients don't have the necessary data to make decisions, right? Like they're not, maybe haven't invested in a platform like Pendo or put in the time and energy. And your response to me was, actually, I think people have too much data. So I want to kind of switch to what we do with that data. Like, Greg, in your experience, what's the process from taking maybe a lot of data and actually making it actionable? How do you move, as a lot of people like to say, insight to action or insight to implementation? What was the process for doing that? If there are these, now we live in a world where there's reams of data coming at people.
Well, yeah, it's hard. I think that unfortunately we have to sometimes push back against all the data that is being tossed at us and make sure that we're, politely challenging, like, is that really a data point that we need to consider? And Holly made reference to it earlier that, sometimes there's problems that don't need to be solved. And so I think that you have to have some, good, honest conversations about, like, well, is this really important? But I think you also have to be brave and ask the question, like, well, does this really impact the business goal or the UX goal? And if it's neither, then do we really need to talk about it? Or figure out a way to measure, is its impact so subtle and so small that it's not even worth the time and energy in order to make sure that you're filtering out the noise, so to speak. I find that in terms of, I like to get out ahead of things as a leader, which means that I like to spend a lot of time with my product folks and understanding what's on their roadmap early, so that I can then work with my team to say, okay, well, how would we want to tell this story? How would we want to define some metrics, or some data that would be compelling and that would be either additive to what we're building or politely, subtractive? Is that a word? But, politely, say, like, maybe you're thinking about this wrong. Maybe people will be willing to adopt that thing, but we got to do these other things first. And that's what this data is showing us. It's not showing us that we should push forward on this thing. It's showing us that we should pump the brakes. We should get rid of some of this extraneous noise and make sure we're really focused on the core versus the periphery of the issue at hand.
Holly, Lizelle, anything to sort of add there on turning data into actionable decisions?
That really resonated with me, Greg. And I think that's one of the next step of the journey that we're on. There's a danger of us wanting to measure everything and not really knowing what it means. And I'm trying to work out the best way so that our product people, our UXers and our product owners don't fall into that trap, because you hear it from other places as well. I think one of the avenues that we're trying to do to mitigate against this is to really pump up the educational side of things. So not just how to use technology to harness data, but actually more around how to think about that information in the context of that business challenge problem. And then what are those incremental steps to take using that data for whatever the work might be. So that's how we are trying to position that within our organization. But again, we're a huge organization, so we're obviously starting in a very small space, because you can't do this with all of the many people at once. You have to start small.
Yes, I am a big advocate of starting small. And as a person that has spent more time on the design side of the house than the product management side of the house, I find that starting small has the added benefit of not giving anyone a feeling of encroachment on their work. UX is I consider it probably the strangest profession there is, because we have a lot of ability to impact a decision, but we don't have the decision making a lot of times. And so I really believe start small and get out ahead of things, so that then you can collaborate internally and then come back and say, okay, we've heard you on these things, the injector pin does this or whatever, adherence is bad, but there's something else, yes, but start small and it'll make it so that you build a better relationship and rapport with people that might feel like, well, why are you pushing back on my business case? But that's also crucial to get out ahead, in my opinion, of what's coming down the pike, so to speak, because you can't fight that battle. You're Sisyphus if you're fighting that battle at the beginning of the quarter and you've already got the project on the roadmap and it's supposed to be done in that quarter. It's too late then. Then you're just adding data. Hopefully this will help, but you may not really be able to impact the direction.
Yeah, I'm also an advocate of starting small. I always tell my designers it's much easier to add on to something in the product than to take away something that exists in the product. And I think that that starts with the data that we're looking at as a team. One of the points that you made, Greg, about having too much data and what data do we analyze, I think that we can help with that by ensuring that we're not being siloed in our data analysis, because that's when we tend to introduce bias. We might, to Lazelle's point, not have strong understanding of how to analyze that data, and as a result, get the wrong insight from it. So if we are ensuring that we're sharing that data with our team, maybe with our stakeholders, getting feedback on it, there's going to be a higher likelihood of accuracy, and also helping us to stay in check about what to focus on, what to deliver, and not to go too big too soon.
Well said.
That's great. And Greg, you started to allude to it, but I'll open this question up to not allude to it, actually directly talked about this sort of overlap in UX and product management. And so I'll kind of open this up to the group. In some organizations, data recording, measurement lives in an analytics group. Some folks, it might live more in product, maybe more in design. What are some best practices in data sharing, communicating data? It could be data ownership. I mean, we don't have to get into who owns the data, but it's like how are people using data within an organization in terms of best practices cross team? If you want to cover best practices, as you were mentioning, Holly, in terms of like within the UX team, that's fine. But I am curious, like, how are people sharing data with others in their organization if they're doing the measurement? How is that? What are some best practices around basically collaboration? It can be product, it can be UX. If you want to bring engineering into this, they're obviously the other sort of leg of the stool as part of this. If you want to talk about business, we're happy to go there. So does anyone have sort of a starting point in terms of like best practices with product and UX collaborating around data?
Well, I'll go first if it's okay with others. One of the things I first of all think that in the essence of trying to get out ahead of things for your team, creating something that gives an ongoing feedback mechanism at any level of granularity is immensely helpful, because when you start small with that thing and then you start to share it, it makes it so that you're not directly attacking anyone's ideas, anyone's pets, right? So, Holly mentioned I think it was UMUX, which is that's the proprietary score by Jeff Swaros, right? Is that the one? Yeah. So from what I've read about it, and Holly, you could certainly speak to it better than I, but it's a complex proprietary type thing that can help you understand the quality of your experience at many, many levels. At TaxSlayer, we did a much simpler route it worked for us for where we were in our journey. And we just took the SEQ question, and it's just a simple Likert scale question. And we started asking that at about roughly 100 different places in the application at the end of tasks. So what it did was it gave us after we averaged all of the scores, we then had a rank ordered listing of how people felt about different parts of the application. Now, there's some noise in those numbers. It's not perfect. But what it does give you is it gives you an artifact that you can start to share and socialize and say, like, this is UX owning its own destiny. This is user experience saying, we know that this thing that's number 12 on the list probably isn't going to get tackled, but we're still going to make sure that we put it out there so that someone else may see it. And then the collaboration can begin, because someone else may see that thing and go, gosh, that thing, if we did this, we could eliminate it too, type of thing. Like someone that has domain knowledge about, 1099G or something, some random tax form, but by sharing that and by saying like, well, right now we're hearing from our customers that they don't like this, then maybe someone else that knows more about 1099G can say, well, what about this? What if we tried this? Do you think we could improve it that way? Then you're starting to have things you can use to impact the vision and the direction going forward. And And it's not a number that's quantitatively sound. It's not a number that, I could take to MIT and brag about. It's just a simple set of averages, but it's powerful because people can't deny it. It came from one place. It's, simply tabulated. And if they do want to deny it, we can have a conversation. It might yield places we want to research more.
I'd like to jump in on the best practices topic. And if you see me looking down, I've just got some notes here, but I encourage my designers to create dashboards within Pendo. Of course, we use our product, but I was a former customer. I strongly believe in the value of our product. So I encourage them to create dashboards, to define metrics with their product counterparts, to ensure that they are in alignment on what they're trying to measure. I encourage them and my researchers, when they create research plans, to share those out also and ensure that everyone is aligned on the goals of the research and what they're trying to understand with the data. And then to continue to review those metrics. Once they have the artifacts in place, dashboards, reports, whatever it is, I encourage them to review that, ideally with their product manager and maybe even someone from engineering, because I think they benefit from this too. Weekly, at least on a recurring basis, but I think weekly is a good cadence to be able to identify trends and continue to see how the progress is flowing with whatever decision they've made and whatever they've launched. So those are just a few of the things that I encourage, but design at Pendo has a lot of autonomy, I'm really happy to say. So even though product drives a lot of the decisions surrounding the problem, and engineering and design drive a lot of the decisions around the solution, it's very much a conversation that happens. As long as our designers are bringing data to the conversation and they are able to talk about the why behind what they're pushing for, they really do have a lot of opportunity to influence the roadmap.
Yeah, behave like a product manager is the thing. I'm totally with you, Holly. I always encourage my people, don't be afraid to go use those tools just because someone said, well, product management has that tool. Like, just ask a few questions, go learn how to use it, and then you can come back with some data that might be really valuable. Roll your sleeves up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good question, and I'm thinking about that in the context of where I work. We are set up across various lines of business, and our products are actually anchored across those areas, but our users are going across all areas. So one of the challenges we have is how we manage those user journeys in an integrated way. And we recognize that obviously data can help us streamline that and optimize on that. However, we also are collecting or collating information in various places that perhaps are not integrated with each other. So I think one of the practical challenges we have when you work in an enterprise is it's not just about collaboration and talking to each other. It's actually about coming up with a plan for how that information is aggregated, and that then informs others that are working with the same groups of users and or types of jobs that those users might be doing. That's something that we need to and will continue to fine tune. I reference it as an ecosystem, an analytics ecosystem, because for us, it's not just about how our users are behaving in the applications. We are regulated. So it's also about how our processes are governing what they do, and whether or not we can optimize that as well. And then, of course, we have a design group that are also doing the various research activities with our internal and also some external user bases. So I describe this future vision that we will come to a place where any product person, be it a product owner or a designer or even one of our tech leads, can access information in some sort of central way that helps to answer some key questions, or at least helps to understand some of those journeys that those users are going through against their product and their context, and where those users are coming from other products in a different line of business. So it's an interesting problem to solve, And as I say, we're at the start of this interesting problem to solve. And I think it's also why having sort of an operational mindset about how to do that is part of the capabilities, I think, that you would normally have, not just from a design point of view or a product management point of view, but I think it's that glue, isn't it, that sort of helps stick things together and work out how it actually works to realize some of those, hopefully realize some of those benefits that we believe we'll be getting when we start to sort of integrate our thinking a little bit more.
So can I ask a follow-up on the operationalized component? I feel like, again, I'm speaking from design perspective, but work with organizations that have established design teams or established product teams. The operationalization tends to come later in the process. I don't know how else to say it. And you're kind of, I think, starting there. And so, like, if I'm understanding that right, what does that mean to, operationalize it or have that mindset? And what do you think that you're starting there? What does that give you and your organization moving forward?
So we recognized that we had a gap in real-time access to user information in data. We recognized that was a gap across all of our key product areas. But you can't just suddenly turn on the light switch and ta-da, now you have data. So you have to work out how to start that journey with a large internal cohort of product owners, business analysts, designers. So the starting for us is building up some fundamentals. So creating some artifacts and documentations that describe what we mean in our context, in our business. Identifying tooling that will start to help show that information. And that's kind of like where we are at the moment. We're now identifying the tooling and beginning to put some small use cases to that to generate some tangible value from it. Obviously, being an optimist, we think it's going to be fine. And so the next big stage for us is actually how do you scale this in a sustainable way, not increase resources, but actually scale across your business and other lines of business, maintaining the right momentum, maintaining the right governance, because obviously we have to adhere to that and we want to because that's the right thing to do, but also building up a skill set within our organization. And it's not me, myself, and I, right? It's a shared objective that we have within the area that I work in under digital products. But my part of that journey or that vision is to build up this particular capability and enable us to enable the product teams to have access to meaningful information. And then as we learn and iterate and perhaps fail along the way, we strengthen the knowledge across the business.
Well, speaking of, sorry, Mark, but thinking about like combining data points, I always had this like grand vision across lines of business at my last employer of creating a user scoring system that would allow us to then look across the person's journey of being a taxpayer at different points in time, but also then make it so that we could use that scoring system to say, okay, once we see the scoring system on the whole change for this group of people, then maybe we need to think about migrating them to our other professional product, or whatever the case may be. But I always wanted to try to come up with that sort of a scoring mechanism that brought together qualitative and quantitative in a weighted fashion that could allow us to better understand things, both, from two factors, and then potentially broadcast it across the org using all sorts of data. This idea that like, how many times did a person that, made X amount of money and filed single and had 2 kids, tax stuff, obviously American tax stuff. Sorry, Lizelle. But, what, if we could create one score that we could then echo back to leadership and say like, okay, their overall score is a 70 or whatever the case may be. But that tells us this, and it's an amalgamation of number of times they called support, number of emails they sent, number of times they failed to log in before they had to reset their password. Like I've always wanted to get to that level, but to your point, it's all these disparate sets of data that we're trying to bring together. But it's really cool what you're talking about, and it can be exciting to watch.
Yeah, well, yeah, we hope. Yeah, I'm an optimist, but actually, we sort of are thinking in a similar way, and we sort of, one of the coins that we're using is a sort of a friction score. And the way I think of it very simply is I'm going to now use a reference I know, London Underground. And I just think of it very simply in that way, because, if you think of rush hour in the London Underground, all that friction. And if you can imagine visualizing that at the same time across all the tube stations, that's actually what our world is inside our organization with all of the clinical systems that our people are using. That is actually the reality. So if we can create a way to show that to our leadership, but also to our various product teams, it then will help us work out faster. I'm convinced of this. Where do we put the resources and effort in the most? And I think this is why it's quite compelling what we're trying to do, because we're also trying to think about it not just from a product point of view, but we're also trying to work out how do we, once we've worked out it on the product side, right? How do we then understand that in our business context and the market dynamics of our business, where we are running our operations of trials and things like that? How do we then start to understand that information to be able to predict improvements before rush hour hits, right? That's kind of like how we think about it.
Sounds hard.
Super. It does sound very, very difficult and super. I'm glad you went there, Lizelle, because I was going to ask that question of you folks, which is, if we're gathering data at the user sentiment, quant and qual levels, and we're asking product and design to make decisions, and then, part of the reason I think it's helpful to have data is to back up some of our decisions and drive decision making. But how are people connecting that to business data? So you mentioned, Lizelle, there's friction points in your business, and you're trying to map out a future where you can understand ahead of time, predictively, maybe where those friction points are, and these we have a net benefit for the business. Are there other ways people are kind of connecting the data we're talking about? I'm just going to say it's down here at the user level with the business. Are people doing it really directly? Are people doing it subtly? Are people not even worrying about trying to do it because it's too complicated? So this is a question I get asked a lot by my clients. So you're actually going to hopefully be educating me. I'm looking for some help here. So anyone have an answer there?
I'll say that I believe it's incumbent upon design teams to push on those business principles, and then not be afraid to make them their own and use them as a part of the discussion. We worked on a point of sale project at Walgreens, and it was around digital receipts. And what we had on one side, on the product side of the house, was people saying we could save X millions of dollars if we could get more people to use digital receipts. What we had so that's the quantitative side of the house. And then on the qualitative side, you had us doing user interviews and intercepts, after people completed a transaction, and they're all saying, we don't want a receipt. It's a Snickers bar. Just leave us alone. Don't ask us at the point of sale if I want a digital receipt. So what we did was we took the amount of time we were there and the volume of front of house sales that the store typically had. And then we were able to broadcast a number that is not statistically significant. But we were able to say we were there from 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. And there was, I'm making these numbers up, 1,700 transactions that went through. We know we interviewed 7 people and only 2 of them liked the idea. Okay, so that's roughly 70% of the population then that's going to experience this when they get to the point of sale is going to fall into the group of people that said, I don't want this receipt at all, right? So it's taking a metric that people might be like, why do you care about that for design? And it's really, for me, it harkens back to the idea that, we have to be able to think like product managers, and we have to know our business. We have to understand how our business makes money, because if we're not making money with our output, then we're doing art. And if you want to do art, but go do it elsewhere, because this place isn't going to pay you for your art. You've got to make it applicable and relevant to other stakeholders. And let's be real, we're the only people that really, care about some of the soft, squishy stuff that goes on in UX, feelings and emotions. Like, that's our specialty. But a lot of the folks in other parts of the company, it's A or B, it's black or white for them. They don't see the gray space like we do. We've got to then meet them and talk to them in ways they'll understand, not just continue pushing, for a higher SUS score or whatever the case may be. If you're doing that, you're just throwing your words into a vacuum for people that are going to be like, well, cool, those numbers don't tell me anything. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Holly?
Yeah. Something that comes to mind, Greg, as you were speaking for me, is I have heard many designers and engineers over the years say, help me understand how my work actually adds value. Help me to connect my work to what the customer receives and if it benefits them or not. I don't know if the things that I'm doing are making a difference for the positive or the negative. And so I think about that when I am considering how much time designers should spend on understanding the business and understanding the data. If you want to understand how you're making a difference, it's worth investing in learning at least the basics of product analytics. Understand what conversion means, what retention means, understand these numbers for your company, understand your business, to your point, Greg. Spend some time looking at the competition. It's not anymore about just knowing Figma, knowing prototypes and wireframes and that kind of thing. You really do have to understand the business, but it makes you a better designer, in my opinion. And it also helps you to find more value in the work that you do, because you understand how it connects to that customer experience.
Impact.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's actually our new team thematic goal. Impact over effort as the design team at Pendo. We just defined it.
Nice.
And is that, sorry, Holly, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. You could say no, but is that impact then design? Is it defined in business terms or?
Well, I think that it's easiest when there are business goals set and design knows those business goals and can attempt to align their goals with the business goals. I think it's harder when design just kind of creates goals of their own, which I have worked at places in the past that have done that. And you can measure that, but at the end of the experience, the question is, well, how does that still affect the business? I know that maybe the time to value is a little faster for the customer, and that's great, but does it actually make any difference in the bottom line for the business? So in my opinion, it's easiest to do that when there are business goals set and the design goals roll up to those business goals. But they have to be set at the top level, and there has to be support from leadership, in my opinion, to make that successful.
I see a lot of nodding heads. What do we do in the environment where we don't have such a luxury of leadership? That's, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but like a lot of businesses aren't able to, a lot of leadership is not able to define success or KPIs that they can pass along to their team. So if you're an individual practitioner, or if you're leading a product team and leading an effort to gather data, like what do you do in those environments where it's impossible to bridge those gaps? There is actually literally a gap between, yes, I understand if it's a, if it's a software company, they're going to make money selling software, right? There maybe, but how do you help, like, from our level in the organization, understand the business better or bridge that gap?
I say you start somewhere. Just start and present it to your leaders. They might be grateful to have someone take the initiative to get.
So define it. Start to define it for leadership as a way.
Start to define it for them. Yes, it might
sticks.
require a little bit of additional work and research on your part, but it's worth it. You learn more and you get an opportunity to potentially help drive the business forward. So yeah, I think it's worth it. Just somebody start somewhere.
I also think something you said earlier on, Holly, about meeting your stakeholders where they are. So in the sort of the environment, enterprise environment that I am in, don't assume that they, from a design point of view, don't assume that they understand your expertise, because they don't. And so you have to be able to understand their language and talk their language, not yours. So some of the really cool methodologies that you are working in is a bit of a so what. It has to be more about this is the problem. By doing this, this is how it's going to solve this particular issue. And this is what it means to a user group. This is what it means to the business. This is what it means to the impact that we are trying to achieve. And that language and that way to talk is something that I think anyone could practice learning. One of the things we do in our organization is we really try to, and everybody, it doesn't matter what job you have, it doesn't matter. Everybody is expected to understand our core business value chain and understand right from the very beginning all the way through to the end what exactly is happening. And that expectation runs through all lines of business. And that's a really great place to start, whatever business you're in.
Be bold. That's what I tell my people is like, don't be afraid to be bold. That doesn't mean be impolite, but nothing will earn you more street cred with your partners than when you show up with something that they were not expecting, but it makes sense and it's sound.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's a bit of, I think you're right. It's be bold. It's market yourself, tell stories. You are at times in the sales business. Maybe that's a word people don't like in design or product, but I do feel like at the end of the day, our soft skills of building bridges and trust and speaking in other people's languages, whether it's engineering or business, product management, the building those bridges goes really, really far, and it's incremental steps. And I don't know if people always think it's like in their role to build those bridges. As you said, Lizelle, like, oh, what you think what you're doing is fancy stuff and really, really interesting, and that's amazing. But there is at times in organizations, what does it mean for me? Or I don't need to understand the technicalities of what you're doing from a design perspective or a product perspective. I'm really looking at outputs. So that soft skills, that relationship building is huge in enterprises or of all shapes and sizes, organizations of all shapes and sizes. And I do think it's something that people maybe don't spend enough time on. They think they have the data or they have the information or they have the right idea, and they don't spend as much time crafting the story or communicating.
I think you're right, Mark. And it's something I've observed in my area with my colleagues that are specialists and practitioners. They're all amazing. Seriously, they really are. And I just love working with them and I love listening to them and everything. But and I wonder whether it's an archetype as well. Very humble. The profile is very humble. And I think one of the things you have to learn is, especially if you're in a business setting and you're working in an enterprise, you have to learn how to sell yourself a little bit and be able to tell the story, even if it's a small win, even if it's a very small thing that has happened, that's a good thing. You have to be able to find a way to talk about that, because I think in sort of these big corporate enterprises, the more senior people are in the leadership ladder, it is sometimes a little bit short term in terms of the thinking. So even those short term wins might seem silly to brag about, but actually that's not, because that's how people measure, okay, we're making progress, we're going the right way. I understand that things are moving in the way I thought it was going to be, and I think that's a skill that any sort of designer inside a corporate should think about.
And learn the value of some of the sayings you hear from your senior people when you have to have those discussions. Yes, and no, but. I mean, it sounds cheesy and corny, but it works. And it's a way to sometimes go to your partners if you're working, ahead. If you've got your data, say like, yes, and this will work because of this also. Listen, I got a concern, but maybe we could talk about this, but I feel like getting out ahead of those things is crucial, but
It's great. Just a reminder, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the comments. I have one more, which is future state for you folks. What does like a mature data-informed organization look like from where you're sitting in the organization? And I know maybe everyone's worked in different organizations with different levels of maturity. I know Lizelle, you're very early in the journey, but you probably have a vision out there. But what does that vision look like for folks? And what does it enable teams to do?
In my opinion, everyone is empowered with access to the data. I've worked at companies in the past where designers, engineers, even product people at times did not have access to the data, didn't have access to customers. And so they really kind of had to rely on gut instinct. So if everyone's empowered to have access to that data, I think that's important. I think that leadership should regularly challenge people to bring data to the conversation about their product decisions and describe how that data supports their decision. If leadership is doing it, there's going to be more buy-in and more space made to do that kind of work. And then measurable goals should be set before something launches and ideally revisited after the launch to ensure that those goals are met. If not, the data leveraged, that data should be used to determine what next steps are if those goals aren't met. In my opinion, that's what maturity looks like.
That's great. Thanks.
I agree with everything you've just said, and so I don't have anything more to add on that. But I think if I was to look at it, my business context, then I think there's a real understanding of what we mean by managing our users across multiple applications in the regulated processes that they have to work in. I think for me, understanding that in an integrated way, because of everything you've just so beautifully described, Holly, would be like the ideal future state. And I think the other thing for me is that anyone working in that sort of environment is also having fun. And fun is also, for me, about learning, right? So, you know, you said it, I think it was you, Greg, earlier on about just like just work it out, you know, like learn. And I think that is what fun at work for me is about. It's about learning. So I'd love to see this sort of appetite for self learning by my peers, by me, because it is actually really rewarding working in an environment that is, for us anyway, now in my business, it's quite a new concept to think like this around user centricity in the work, and also coupled with how we think about managing our regulated business. It's really refreshing to think like that in a business context. So yeah, have fun.
Big proponent of fun. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I would say that what a mature data organization looks like. So I would just add that I think that if your design team is sharing some metric that they find valuable and socializing it, as well as socializing the results of other research that's going on, that will really add to your maturity. And it makes it so that people have something they can get it, they can talk about it. You've given them something they can digest in their language. I also think that you're approaching maturity or being more mature when people from outside the your little corner of the world start to ask for the metrics that you're creating. Mm-hmm. They start to ask you, what do you think? Can you help shed some more light on this? And a lot of times executives will call upon the UX person in the room because they want them to bring that other side to them, right? They're looking to give you that ability to have your voice, right? They need it because they know they're going to make a decision, and they know that if you're too hidden behind the requirements you were given, then they're not going to be able to make a fully informed decision. So for me, maturity is that you have things you're sharing in a consistent and ongoing fashion. Don't let it stop. If it fails for a month or something, whatever your cadence is, that's really bad for the uptake. Then they lose that momentum, right? So socialize it, and then pay attention. When people start to ask you what you think or why, that's where your data should be able to come in and support you that you've been working on up to that point.
Awesome. Thanks to all three of you. I did get a question from somebody on my team before we started, so I do want to ask it, which is, what is a piece of advice each of you has if someone's working in an organization, again, individual contributor or lead, and they feel like that no data is being accessed? They're just starting their data journey. They want to make data-driven design decisions, but they're in an organization where it's just not part of the picture. Maybe it's a vibes organization, or it's a startup where it's founder-led and it's whatever's in maybe that person's brain. Each of you have a piece of advice if someone's really, really like the organization's early in their journey, the person's in their journey to just make, kind of that first step. How do you go about doing that?
I think I'm sort of in that space a little bit. I think I've gone past a little bit of the of the hump. I think you have to ask yourself, why is it that you want the data? What are you going to do with it? I think you have to know what you're going to do with it first, before you can be able to position why it's valuable to the organization.
So it's really about internally understanding that and kind of almost making a case to yourself that there's a need for it before you do kind of anything.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think becoming a data evangelist at the organization, if no one's talking about it, be that person. If you feel insecure about your level of knowledge of it, at Pendo, one of our biggest challenges within the analytics part of the product in particular are customers that just don't really know that much about data analysis. And that's okay. Everyone has to start somewhere. So spend some time learning tools like Pendo or some of the other tools that offer data analytics. And if need be, use ChatGPT, use AI. There's a lot of really great assistance in AI products today in understanding the terms, synthesizing the data, even knowing how to communicate that to your leaders. But I do agree with Lizelle that it's important to also be able to go when you present that idea to your leaders to explain why it's going to be valuable, because there will be at some point some time and cost associated with it. So you'll have to sell it from that perspective as well. But just be that person.
Awesome. Greg.
Be bold again, not to echo the same sentiment again, but don't be afraid to get out there and get the data and use it to tell your story, and start small. So you're in an organization that is not prepared for this. You may open up a world of thoughts from a world of people, and data scientists, for example. There's all sorts of people that will get interested in what you're saying, and but if you go too far, too fast, then you're forcing your audience to drink from the fire hose, and that's not going to work. So start small, be bold, and then I would encourage people to, if you're by yourself in an organization, find a good mentor that can help you work through some of those challenging moments where, you may have to say something that's not as, supportive. Because we do at times we have to be not afraid to say, I really think it's a bad idea, and here's why. But find that mentor in the company that can help you work through those situations and understand, like, well, maybe now is just the wrong time for that conversation for the business. Like, if you bring that up right now while the site's crashing, you're going to get nowhere. So park that idea and let's come back to it when we know we'll have a receptive audience. So those are the things that I would cite.
Right on. So everybody who's listening, go find a Lizelle, a Holly, or a Greg in your organization that can mentor you and help you tell the right story, kind of be the change you want to be, get a good foundational understanding of why you need the data and want it, and tell that story and make that case, which is a great place to wrap, folks. I just want to say thank you, Lizelle, Holly, Greg. Immense gratitude from me and the team at Fuzzy Math for you joining the panel today and answering questions and diving into the do's and don'ts, the whys of data, and some of the challenges you all have faced along the way. I think it's really invaluable experience and expertise based on your journey. So thank you very much for your time and energy today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think thanks everyone for listening. Hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Take care.